Lightroom Classic is a fantastic and very powerful tool for you editing your photos. If you shoot in RAW, it's in my humble opinion perhaps the best option for editing your RAW photos. For the beginner, it's far easier to learn than its cousin Photoshop, and it has more than enough features to edit your photos for use on social media, for sharing with friends and families, and even for professional printing. So in this series of videos, I'm breaking down Lightroom Classics into its bite-sized chunks to make it easy for you as a brand new photographer to learn, so that you can start using the power of Lightroom for your own photo editing. My name's Steve, this is Behind the Tripod, and today we're going to be looking at the Basic tab. So let's open up Lightroom and get stuck into today's video.
So I'm in Lightroom right now. I've got my image selected in the library section. If you don't know how to upload your images into Lightroom, then I have a video on that. You can check it out in the Lightroom playlist. But for now, we're going to go up to the top right corner here where it says Library. We're going to go to Develop. This is where we have our developing settings. So I'll click that there, and you can see our image that we selected has come up nicely. Now look at this pane on here. We've got our presets, snapshots, history is a very useful one to click, and that will show us as we move through what we've done in terms of history of the edits to our image. We can go back at any point and re-edit from a specific point. Remember, the beauty of Lightroom is it's non-destructive, so your original image isn't being changed, it's being changed as a copy, as it were, in Lightroom. Okay, we've got collections here. So history is the one that you're going to need the most. And over on the right hand side, I can't speak, is your histogram here. We've got a few sections, but what we're looking for is the Basic tab. If yours doesn't look like that, I've been playing around with the Lightroom for a while, so if yours doesn't look like that, when you come in, it might look, I'll just close all these down, like this. You'll have a whole load of just tabs. Click on the Basic tab and that'll bring up the bits that we're going to play with today. So for my workflow, I'd usually start with cropping. I'm not going to crop this image, but I would normally start there and then move into the basics to give a general kind of sweep of the editing for the image. This is like your first step of the edit. And there's lots of things you can do on here. So we'll start first. We've got the treatment. You've got color or black and white. So if you want to convert it to black and white, you can, or you can go back into color. If you're in color or black and white, you've got some sections here that give you a few ideas. You can have standard, you can change a few things on here, portrait, and it just basically makes some of the colors pop or affects image in different ways. You can see there's some changes. I'm just going to stick with Adobe Color. I like to start from a blank canvas, so on Adobe Color. This is a raw image. You can see it's quite flat in terms of its color, so this is where we can start to correct things and just start to bring out some of the details as we go. So moving down here, we've got white balance. Now sometimes you may choose to use a dropper and drop it on a white part of the image. I don't tend to do that. I think unless you've got something that you know is definitely white, like a very white sheet of paper, that won't really help you. You can use as shot, but you can also edit it here by warming it up or cooling it down. Okay. See, you don't have to go fine, it really affects your image. So I'm happy with white balance here, so I'm going to press Control Z just to undo what I did there, and that'll take it back. I'm sorry, my camera's doing some really funky stuff, isn't it? It's sending me very white at times, and then very washed out, and then very dark again. So I don't know quite what's going on with the camera, but I apologise if it's a bit distracting. The tint here is useful for different cameras. Some cameras have a slight greenish tint, some a slight magenta tint, and you can use this just to affect that if needs be. Moving down, so we've assumed that we've set up the white balance. We can go back and change this later date if we need to, but we're moving on to tone now. So this is the exposure. You can click auto. I never touch auto. I think we want to have control over our editing, so I'm going to teach you to work without any of these auto settings. So this is exposure. So the beauty of if you shoot in RAW, if you're a little bit underexposed by a stop or so, or overexposed, you can change it here. Okay, you can under or overexpose it. I'm going to keep it roughly where it was, so you can use the sliders sliding up and down. I'm just going to click 0 and just put that back to where it was again. Contrast again, you can make it a little bit more contrasty. Contrast affects the highlights and the sort of brightest parts of the image and the darkest parts of the image, okay, and they make them sort of pop against each other. I'm going to come down and use some other areas in this section to deal with the contrast, and sometimes I'll come back up to contrast at the end and boost it or reduce it as I need. But to start with, I don't tend to touch exposure unless it's massively under or overexposed. I don't touch contrast. This is where I'm coming here. This will give you the contrast. So we're looking at highlights. This affects the higher end of or the lighter end of the histogram up here. Okay, actually if you hover on the histogram, you can see where it's affecting. So we've got your whites, your highlights, these are your midtones, it's exposure, shadows, and dark. It highlights them very, very very nicely there. So for this one, the highlights I think are okay. I'm going to boost them slightly, but I want to boost the shadows, drop those down a little bit more. That will give us a little bit more contrast. You can see the effect that's having on the image. So it's keeping the lights as they are, but it's affecting just the shadows. Okay, so I'm going to drop that. Come on to the whites now. These are the highest light starts. So these are the very brightest parts of the image. Again, we can boost them, we can drop them. I am just going to boost them very slightly. And then the blacks, these are the darkest points of the image, and I'm just going to drop those slightly. And that gives us just a little bit more contrast, makes it pop just a little bit more. Okay. Be careful on this part here, you can overcook it. So if we start to drop the shadows too much, drop the blacks too much, lift the highlights too much, you can see you get this horrible image. So I'll just undo that, Control Z, remember any time, we'll bring those back to where they were. We want to be quite subtle with our editing. I don't like to overdo it with anything on the editing. Keep subtle and then gradually increase things as you need to. We're moving now onto the present section. Now this section is interesting. Again, you can really overcook this section. We're going for very subtle changes. If you do it right, it can really, really make your image pop. But if you overdo it, it can wreck your picture. So we'll look into presence. We're going to texture. Now texture does exactly what it says. I'm going to make this a bit bigger for you because you might not be able to see on YouTube. But if I boost the texture here, see it boosting the shapes, textures of the image, and again we can soften it. So really, really nice. If you're doing portraits, for instance, you want to soften the skin, you might choose to reduce the texture a bit. If you've got some gnarly rocks or something like that, you might want to increase it a bit, but again, just go very subtle, just a little bit of extra there. I can see that probably more than you can due to the compression of YouTube. Clarity. This is again a very interesting one. This is a contrast slider, but it only affects the midtones, and it can give a very, very unique look. So again, if we just hold that clarity right the way up, you might be able to see what that's doing there. It makes it look very artificial. It's not a nice look. I'm not a look I'm a fan of. Again, you can drop it all the way down, and you can probably see what that's done to the image. Again, it washes it all out. So again, you can use this to have a big effect on your image, but again, just keep it subtle. I'm going to boost it slightly because I want a little bit more contrast in this image. Dehaze is interesting. I don't really touch this one very much. What dehaze does, very good for landscape photographers. If you've got a hazy scene, it will take some of the haze away, or you can increase haze. I will show what it does. So if we increase the haze, increase dehaze, it makes it, gets rid of any haze. It makes it really, really sharp. If you go to haze, it almost adds a haze to it. It's not a slider that I use really, so I'm going to get rid of that and take it back to 0. So saturation increases the saturation of the colours throughout the whole of the image. So if we increase that all the way up, you can see the whole image gets saturated. Likewise, if we go down, it goes to black and white. So that will increase and decrease all of the colours. Vibrance does something quite different. So it only boosts the colours that are quite muted, so that the quieter colours in your image, the colours that haven't got a lot of saturation to them. So I'm going to show you what that does. We'll boost the saturation a bit here. Can you see how it's only boosting certain colours? Well, it's boosting certain colours more than other colours. And again, we can reduce it. If you go all the way down, it's not quite black and white. You can still there see yellow and green, because there it's only affecting the more muted colours, and the green and yellow are already quite bright in this image. So again, if I take that up slightly, I don't tend to touch saturation, but I do sometimes play around with the vibrance a little bit just to give it a little bit more colour. Okay, so you can see here that we've just made a few very, very small changes on here. This typically will take no more than 5 minutes, but you can see it's already made a big difference. If I go to hit this button down here, you can get direct comparison between the two. So this is what it looked like before. This is normal for a raw image. They're always very flat, not so clear, not very contrasty, because that's just how raw works. On the right hand side, you can see the image that we've been editing and how different that now looks. Okay, we'll just click on this image there. So if you look, you've got our original image a little bit washed out, but our after image more contrasty, a little bit more punch to it. I think I will just go up and just increase the contrast slightly, actually, just a little bit. Lovely. There's more I'm going to do with this image, but this is your first part of your editing. So for me, again, as I said at the start, I start by going in, I crop the image first to get it to how I want it to look, and then I go into the basics and just do my first sweep of correcting the image and bringing it up to a little bit more how it looked when I first saw the image with my eyes, and then I'll start going in and doing a little bit more with it from there.
So are there any Lightroom functions that you're struggling with? If so, let me know in the comments below and I'll consider doing a video on it in the future. And please remember to like and subscribe this video if you found it useful, so you don't miss any of the other tutorials that I've got coming up soon. But in the meantime, if you'd like to see other Lightroom tutorials, you can check out this playlist right here.